Hey guys, tonight we're gliding into one of my favorite corners of historical weirdness. The part where humans, for thousands of years, looked at something absolutely questionable and still said, yeah, I'm gonna eat that. So go ahead and dim the lights, stretch out, maybe get cozy under a blanket, because tonight we'll drift through the culinary curiosities of the past. The foods people once considered totally normal, but today would get you side-eyed out of a grocery store. Nothing too exciting, nothing too dramatic, just a slow float through a buffet of ancient oddities, questionable delicacies, and dishes that absolutely should have stayed in the imagination phase. This is your bedtime history snack, minus the part where you'd actually want to snack on any of this. Let's ease into it. Humans are funny creatures. For most of history, the bar for what counts as food has been pretty flexible. If it crawled, slithered, fermented, rotted, inflated, deflated, made a strange noise, or could be caught with minimal effort, someone, somewhere, probably served it with pride. But we're going to begin gently, nothing too grotesque right away, with a dish from the Romans, because, of course, it's always the Romans. A civilization so advanced they built aqueducts, roads, and concrete, yet also thought culinary dignity meant stuffing everything with everything until the dish was practically a matryoshka doll of edible confusion. So let's float over to our first historical meal. The Roman obsession with garum. Imagine you're living in ancient Rome. The sun is warm, the streets are loud, and the air is, well, thick with the smell of fermented fish guts. Just absolutely everywhere. Because the Romans didn't just like garum, they lived for it. Garum was their ketchup, soy sauce, fish sauce, salsa.
And I don't know what this is missing, but let's throw garum on it and find out. Condiment. Now, garum wasn't just fermented fish. That would be far too normal. No, it was made by taking small fish, or sometimes just the leftover bits like heads, innards, bones, or whatever was lying around, tossing it all into a large vat, adding a concerning amount of salt, and then leaving it outside, in the sun, for months. Because, of course, that's what you do when you're the world's most powerful empire. You ferment fish intestines on purpose. Over time, the mixture would liquefy into a brownish golden sauce that Romans poured onto just about everything. Bread, meat, vegetables, desserts, basically anything that didn't run away fast enough. And here's the calm, slightly horrifying part. People loved it. Even aristocrats, even emperors. The wealthy had premium garum made from the finest fish. The poor, they had leftovers garum, a budget version that probably tasted like a fish had died twice. And it wasn't just a food, it was an economic powerhouse. Entire coastal towns existed for the sole purpose of making the stuff. Imagine being a tourist, strolling into town, and instantly being hit with the overwhelming aroma of decomposing marine life. A real vacation vibe. But hey, it's what dinner smelled like, or breakfast, or lunch, or really any moment of Roman existence. If you ever feel embarrassed about liking pineapple on pizza, just remember the Romans would have put fermented fish sludge on their pineapple, and then ask for extra. Medieval Europe and the delightful horror of meat jellies. Let's glide forward a few centuries and drift into medieval Europe, a place filled with knights, castles, inconvenient hygiene, and food that didn't always make sense, mostly because
everything was boiled until it surrendered. And because electricity hadn't been invented yet, refrigeration didn't exist. So, how do you store meat? You gel it. This is how we arrive at aspic, a jelly made by boiling animal parts, usually hooves, bones, or whatever wasn't going to be used for something glamorous like a royal feast. The boiling released collagen, which turned into a natural gelatin. Once cooled, voila, medieval jello. Except Instead of fruit inside, it had pork chunks, or fish, or chicken legs staring at you through a translucent, meaty window. Now, to be fair, people didn't eat this because they thought it was trendy or charming. They ate it because it worked. Meat sealed inside jelly stayed fresh longer. Think of it as Tupperware, but edible and wiggly and deeply upsetting. Of course, the wealthy got the fancy version. Clear, perfectly strained jellies with butts of brightly colored vegetables floating inside like someone tried making an artistic centerpiece out of despair. The poor? They got whatever the pot made jelly. Thick, cloudy, questionable, probably containing mystery ingredients like hoof dust or bone surprise. But it was food, and in medieval Europe, food was often more about survival than delight. Rest assured, if you've ever looked at gelatin salads from the 1950s and wondered, why would anyone eat this? Just remember that medieval peasants were the original pioneers of questionable, wobbly cuisine. Vikings and the delicate art of eating fermented shark. Now we drift north, way north, into the world of the Vikings. Strong, determined, fierce warriors with iron stomachs and culinary confidence that bordered on reckless. One of their proudest traditional foods is hakarl, fermented Greenland shark, a dish that modern people tend to describe with tenderness and sweetness, using phrases like the afterbirth of flavor or a nice tingling sensation.
Like tastes like ammonia and burns twice. See, Greenland shark meat is naturally poisonous. Naturally, just right out of the box, toxic. So naturally, the Vikings looked at this dangerous animal and said, let's try eating it anyway. To make it safe, the shark had to be buried underground and left to ferment for months, then hung to dry for several more months. After all that time, the meat transforms into something technically edible, but still aggressively aromatic, the kind of aroma that quietly tells you you've made a mistake before you even bite it. In modern Iceland, hakarl is still eaten on special occasions. Brave tourists try it for the experience, and locals smile politely, fully aware that the rest of the world thinks they're eating something invented as a dare. But among Vikings, this was pride, culinary courage, proof that if you can eat this, you can absolutely raid a monastery before breakfast. Just imagine a Viking chieftain tearing into a chunk of ammonia shark while a bard sings softly in the background about glorious battles. A whole vibe. Ancient China and the Emperor's egg collection. Now let's float slowly from the polar winds of Scandinavia into the rich, warm realms of ancient China, where emperors dined on delicacies considered essential for maintaining vitality, cosmic balance, and personal prestige. One such delicacy was the charmingly named century egg. Now, despite the name, these eggs were not actually buried for a century, but they were preserved in a mixture of clay, ash, salt, quicklime, and rice hulls for weeks or months. Over time, the yolk turns a soft greenish black, somewhere between creamy and jelly-like. The egg white becomes a translucent, amber-colored gel. To someone unfamiliar, this looks like a gemstone that fell into a swamp. But these were treasured foods, not survival rations. And to be fair, century eggs taste far less dramatic than they look. Smooth, rich, almost cheese-like. But for outsiders, the first glance can be a little startling, especially when served whole, sitting calmly on a porcelain dish, looking like something an alchemist accidentally discovered while trying to invent immortality. And that's part of the charm. Eastern preservation techniques often created foods that look dramatically intimidating, but taste deeply nuanced. A reminder that our normal food is almost entirely a product of culture, not logic. Because, logically, if someone handed you a black egg and said, "Don't worry, it's supposed to look like that," your first instinct might be to quietly walk away. But in ancient China, this was luxury. This was medicine. This was flavor. And emperors enjoyed them with the same confidence someone today might enjoy truffle risotto. Let's drift towards something lighter. Medieval sweets were not sweet. Back in medieval Europe, sugar wasn't widely available. Honey was expensive, and artificial sweeteners, well, those were still several centuries and a few questionable chemical experiments away. So what did people use when they wanted something sweetish? Fruit? Sometimes. But more often, they used spices. Medieval desserts were usually flavored with things like pepper, ginger, cumin, anise, coriander, even garlic. Not because they were going for unique fusion flavor profiles, but because those spices were precious and showed off wealth. There's something relaxing about imagining a medieval noble proudly offering a spiced pudding that tastes like someone combined gingerbread with a small accident. The point wasn't sweetness, the point was status. Flavor was secondary. Showing off your wallet was primary. And if your pudding tasted faintly like roasted herbs and mild regret, well, that was fine. The gentle terror of peasant stews. We'll end part 1 with something simple, warm, and slightly chaotic, the everyday peasant stew. Unlike royal feasts or Viking shark buffets, peasant food was all about practicality. A pot over a fire, water, vegetables in whatever quantity you could afford, a scrap of meat if you were lucky, maybe a handful of herbs if you didn't mind the church asking why you were using plants suspiciously. But here's the part that might surprise modern listeners. The stew pot never fully emptied, ever. It was a living stew, a continuous stew, a multi-generational stew. You ate from it, then added new ingredients, then boiled it again, then repeated the cycle for weeks, sometimes months, sometimes longer. Imagine a family telling guests, "This stew has been going for 3 winters now," a culinary family heirloom. It wasn't a recipe, it was a lifestyle, one that simmered gently in the corner while medieval life carried on. And honestly, that's kind of cozy. And also concerning, but mostly cozy.